Hi, my name's Heidi Waterhouse. I'm a developer advocate at LaunchDarkly. We are a company that does feature management as a service, and it's about delivering people what they want, when they want it, in the way that they want it. This talk is actually about accessibility, but not just the accessibility that you're probably thinking of right now. It's about how to make the web more of what it should be and more of what it was born to be. I call it the future should be uneven. In 2003, William Gibson, the author of Neuromancer and a bunch of other cyberpunk that probably you know about, said, in The Economist, the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. And the more I think about that, the truer it gets, because that's what we keep futurists around for, is to tell us what the future could be and is going to be and may yet be avoided. All of those things are in a futurist brain all the time. The dominating image that I had when I decided to put this talk together was this one. This particular version of it was created by the Center for Story-Based Strategy, an Oakland company just like us, and they had a lot of great resources. I kind of got stuck doing the research. I'm like, oh, I want to learn more about this. What we have is a portrayal of the difference between equity, equality, and justice, or liberation. Equality is everybody gets the same thing, no matter what they need. Equity is everybody gets to have the same experience, no matter what needs they have that make it more or less difficult to access that. And liberation is when we take apart all of the barriers to access and make it easy for everyone to have what they want, what they need. So when we think about the internet, we are the privileged people. We are pretty much the assumed user. We think of the internet as fast, like we're going to complain if it takes more than a few minutes to download something. We're going to be able to watch streaming movies. We think of it as free. It's not entirely free. I mean, I do pay a bill for my internet access, but that bill is a fraction of my daily earnings, not a multiple of it. In a lot of parts of the world, that's not the direction it goes. So when I say it's free, it's not entirely free, but I don't have to think about what I'm doing on the internet because it's already paid for and it's not painful for me to do one thing over the other. Like, this download is not going to cost me an appreciable amount of money. I think of it as usable. I can mostly do what I want on the internet when I want to do it. And I think of it as useful. It brings me the things that I want when I want them. But the internet isn't like that for everybody. The internet can be really slow. My parents live in a cell phone dead spot. There's no cell phone reception in their tiny mountain valley less than 2 hours from Seattle. It's just not a thing. And they only have one internet provider, and let me tell you folks, it's not fast. When all the kids come home for the holidays, we all have this moment where we're like, oh yeah, the internet that the rest of the people have. And even then, slow American internet may be faster than a lot of people have. It's really expensive. Like I said, sometimes we're talking about multiple days of pay to access a site. It's broken. It's not useful. It's not accessible. It's something that causes frustration and difficulty when people are trying to use it. And it's hurtful. I'm not talking about the personal hurtfulness of users interacting with each other. That's a different problem, and I'm not going to step into that today. What I'm talking about is it is hurtful to realize that somebody has not foreseen your existence, that somebody has never thought, well, how would it feel if I were the person in that situation experiencing this? How would I feel if I had lost a wanted pregnancy and was getting baby minder updates? How would it feel? We don't very often ask ourselves that question because there isn't an obvious A to B connection with money. And we're paid to build the internet, and we think a lot about how much things cost and what they're worth. John Rawls came up with this concept that he called the veil of ignorance, which I kind of love. Basically, what he's saying is how would you design society if you didn't know what place you would have in it? Like, we all know how we would design society for the people that we have now, the people that we are now. How would I design society? Well, I tell you what, middle-aged women would get a lot more respect. And I think that also cyclists would have a much better experience. I would put in a lot more bike lanes and make driving more difficult, because those are the things that matter to me. Rawls-Vale says, you can design any kind of society you want, but you don't know who you'll be in it. Will you be a wheelchair user? Will you be a black man? Will you be something that is oppressed by the society that you create? Stop and think, he says, about how your society that is ideal for you is unideal for somebody else. This is all very high-flown philosophy. We are in the philosophy section of the talk here. You're going to be okay. I like to think of this as the cake problem. Maybe your parents did this too. My mom would say, okay, you're going to divide this. One kid is going to cut the thing in half, and the other kid is going to pick which half they want. This optimizes everybody's experience, because one child is going to do the very fairest job that they can, because game theory says the other child is going to pick the biggest piece of cake, right? So we can think of Rawls' veil of ignorance and designing society, or we can think about how we would slice the cake that we have, knowing that we don't get to pick which slice of cake we get. It's a nice, concrete way to think of it. The next philosophical thing I want to talk about is the paradox of tolerance. Karl Popper talked about this, but he definitely wasn't the only one. Plato talked about this and why the philosopher king was an important part of his ideal society. Jefferson talked about it. Lots of people have talked about it. To sum up, unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are already intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed, and with them, tolerance. We shouldn't suppress the utterance of philosophies, but we should take care that we are not tolerating philosophies that exclude and push out other points of view. It's really important that we remember this when we're designing the web, because intolerance is an individual action for the most part. And tolerance is a group action, and it's really hard to coordinate a group action. So when we say, I'm going to be tolerant of this and not that, it's really hard. This is what the whole code of conduct problem is deciding what your society can accept that will not disenfranchise too many people and will not lead to the decay of the society that you're trying to build. So, what would make all of this philosophy better? What would make it work better in our modern connected world? I told you that the internet is slow and broken and hurtful. So how do we make that better? We give people consistent access. When we talk about accessibility, we frequently talk about it on one device or one browser or one application. I think that one of the ways we can make the web better is to make all of that accessibility cross-device and cross-browser, and make it really reliable and make it bandwidth aware. The idea of needing extra bandwidth in order to access some accessibility setting seems really counterintuitive, but it would be really easy to have happen. So when I'm thinking about this problem, consistent access isn't just access to the internet, but it's also access to the things that we need to use the internet, whatever those are. I have a million repetitive motion injuries, like I'm essentially put together with floppy rubber bands. Like here's my wrist brace right now. And because of that, I need a split keyboard that allows tenting, that has some keyboard only settings so I don't have to use a mouse because mice are the devil. So I went and bought myself this new toy. Well, I didn't buy myself. My company bought it for me because I'm the internet privileged, right? I bought this new toy, and it's really making me think about how accessibility is something that we could be building into more things. It really is called the ultimate hacker keyboard. The exclamation points are my own. So when we're thinking about how to make the internet better, let's talk about configurability. Let's talk about multiple preferences. And let's talk about fine-grained control. Because control about your inputs and your outputs and being able to choose your workflows and your reminders and your meeting configuration, all of that takes a ton of cognitive load off what you're doing. I think of this as the difference between hunt and peck typing and touch typing. If I don't have to think about it, where I'm going to put my fingers to make something happen, I can just think and the words come out of my fingers. We want that kind of seamless experience for everyone, but it isn't actually that seamless for everyone because we don't have an internet that's fully supporting that. So when I'm talking about multiple preferences, I'm talking about things like color, I'm talking about things like contrast, I'm talking about things like bandwidth, I'm talking about things like no motion. Like, I have ADD, maybe I get distracted by flashy things on the side of my screen. It's not that I don't want people to get ad revenue from me, it's that I can't work if there's something going like this in my peripheral vision. So I really want to be able to control my experience of being on a computer and of being in the world. They're kind of the same thing right now, right? Input sources are a great way to think about this. I type funny. I'm a Dvorak typer, and this is what my keycap layout looks like. Well, no, it doesn't. It actually says QWERTY, but it knows in its heart that it's actually Dvorak. So when I sit down at a computer, the first thing I do is change it over to Dvorak because that's what I touch type in. Everything else is kind of a painful hunt and peck process. This configuration has been around a long time. I remember in 97, 98, being able to sit down at a summer job and change their Mac over to type Dvorak. And I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. I didn't have to bring in a special keyboard or anything. I can just change the keyboard mapping and it knows what I'm saying. And then I want to talk about persistent customization, because there's this thing where I have to change my keyboard at every computer I sit down at. I have to change my device settings every time I go. I used to love new technology day, like new phone day, new computer day, because it was a chance to get to use some new, crazy, cool new technology. I was so excited. Yeah, no, I hate it now because it's so much work for me to port everything that I'm expecting over and to get it to work in the way that I expect. It's not exciting, it's just tedious to try and teach it when I want alerts and when I don't want alerts. So I think one of the things we could be doing and thinking about is persistent customization. Mozilla made a stab at this with their personas, their user profiles. I think that we will begin to see more of a movement toward having a sort of portable pseudonymous profile that lets me experience the web and the world the way that is most useful for me. And it's going to have to be a portable language. I think it will probably be an XML extension, but I guess we'll see. The reason I want this is because changing the input source of my keyboard is actually pretty late in the workflow of logging into a new computer. So I have to log in looking at the keyboard, and then I have to use a mouse, because I haven't taught it that I'm not a mouse person, to get to the settings. And then maybe I have to log in again, looking at the keyboard again to get past the security settings. And once all that's done, I can get down to the keyboard settings and change what I want to change. But if I had a way to take all of that information with me that said, this person types Dvorak and really likes it when her windows go dark when it goes dark outside, I'd be able to get to work that much faster. And the web would feel that much more seamless for me. So Let's talk about future vision, because I'm telling you about this thing that doesn't exist, the pseudonymous preferences profile. When we're talking about accessibility, we're not just talking about disability, we're talking about giving people access to exactly what they need, exactly when they need it, with precision, without having to guess. And allowing people to set that up is going to make them feel so much more invested in what you're doing, because it's also them. Everything that people customize, they get attached to. It's pretty much psychology. Like, if you made something yourself, it is more valuable to you, even if it's lumpy or weird looking, than something that you could buy. That said, we are all only temporarily able-bodied. Sometimes disability is situational, sometimes it's temporary, and sometimes it's permanent. So when I'm thinking about this, Microsoft put out this amazing kit of things that you can do to think about disability. And they talked about the difference between permanent, temporary, and situational disabilities. For instance, a new parent can only type with one arm because they have a baby in the other arm. That's a real thing. Like, I've been there. That's why large phones are such a trial for me, because I don't have small hands, but phones are very big and they sort of expect that you have two hands to use them. And if I don't have like the thumb adaptation turned on, it's very difficult for me to reach the whole screen with my thumb. That's an accessibility consideration. Like, maybe people don't have two hands to use their phones. I think that there's a lot of things that we could do with understanding that people are going to access our stuff in different ways, and I'm excited about it. The web was born accessible. When you look at the RFCs, the very early things, it was born accessible. It was meant to be accessible. And sometimes we screw that up. Sometimes we get it wrong. Sometimes we think that something is so beautiful that it deserves to overwhelm accessibility. I don't think that that's actually true. I think it's possible to make beautiful things that are accessible if we actually work at it. When I was thinking about this, what I realized was prescribing how a web page appears is sort of like fixed mindset. It says, this is what my page is, and this is how it should be. I have this argument all the time with all sorts of products. I don't always want my screen to be the full width of the monitor. Sometimes I would like it to be a third of the width of the monitor. And even on a super wide monitor, some people aren't set up to reflow their applications like that. And when they don't give me that option, they're saying, I believe that my application is so important, it deserves at least half of your screen real estate, and if you don't want to give me that, I'm going to make you really uncomfortable. You're going to have to scroll to try and see everything, or it's not going to wrap well, or whatever it is that you do to adapt to that. They're saying that their vision of how the application appears is more important than my experience. What I want for the web is this growth mindset. When we code semantically, the semantic web, which I'm not going to get into because it's super interesting, but when I try and describe it, I'm like 2 steps away from like pictures on the wall and red string connecting them all, because it's so cool, but it's also complicated. The semantic web says we don't label things by how they look, we label them by their function. So if I say something is an H1, a level 1 heading, maybe that's bold and in larger print. That's a typical H1 treatment, but maybe somebody says it louder. Maybe, I don't know, maybe the Braille keys are raised higher. I'm not sure how that works. I'm not sure if it does work, but I think it would be possible if there were a semantic interpreter. So when we're designing the web, using the semantic web to do what we're trying to describe and inserting that layer of abstraction in allows other people to take the abstractions in the directions that they need, in directions that we can't even imagine right now. Like, maybe at some point the H1 will be, holographic or 3D or augmented reality. I don't know. It could, and if you've designed a web page that does that, it will do that. Design for growth. Design things that are semantic, that are composable. You can take them apart and put them together out of elements. And you want to design things that are opinionated, but not dictatorial. You don't want to lock people in divs that say, this is the container, and I guess good luck figuring out what's in the container. You want to say, here's how I think a web page should go, but if you have a better idea, please, here's the API. I'd love to see what you do with it. My first talk at RubyConf was the 7 righteous fights, and it was about how there are things that we forget to build in early enough, and accessibility was certainly one of them. But I've come to realize that the whole point of talking about technical debt isn't that debt is inherently bad, it's that we're making trade-offs, that we are borrowing from future work in order to make this capital investment. And that's a really exciting way to think of it, because it gives us a lot more latitude to say, what am I borrowing for? What is the future that I am building for? How do I anticipate this going? It's like platting out a town. You walk into this wilderness and there's trees and a river, and somebody comes along with some surveying sticks and said, this is where we're going to put the university, and this is where we're going to put the cemetery. You don't have people for either of those yet, but you're going to. That's what I want us to be building, is a town that has room for growth. So you don't have to have a cemetery a dozen miles away. So what I keep saying about accessibility and access and the semantic web, it all comes down to empowerment. I want to give users choice in their input. And some of the choices that we give users already are typing and speaking and eye trackers and mouse-free movement. We think about as many things as we can, but because we are not all accessibility experts, and because even different accessibility experts have different specialties, we can't know them all. So we're using that semantic abstraction layer as an API so that other people can access what we're trying to say. We want to give people a choice in how things are presented to them. For instance, I'm not great at watching videos. It's better now that I figured out I can speed them up, but some people really want visual input. Some people really want audio input. Some people need tactile input, like it's not real unless you can touch it, or they're deafblind and can't see or hear and can only feel. I want to choose whether I want to look at the whole thing or have it unveiled step by step. These are different learning styles that work differently for different people on different topics. Sometimes it's overwhelming to see all 27 steps of a procedure, and so people want like a smaller chunk revealed at a time. And sometimes people want to understand the whole concept and they want to see it all at once, and having it revealed slowly would be sort of irritating and annoying. One of the things that I think of is, I used to say I didn't like anything animated on the web, but that's not true. I really love diagrams that are animated because then I can see how things relate to each other. But other people find the motion really distracting. So I think it would be great if we could have choices in how information was presented to us. I want choices in action. I want to be able to say, here is how I want to do things that's accepted. I want to be able to say, this is my workflow. For instance, Gmail has a really opinionated way to handle email. It thinks that you should immediately sort something into either like archive, I've read this and I don't need to do anything about it, or respond. And by default, no, but they added a thing that says respond and archive. So it's like, I want to respond and get this out of my inbox. Gmail is obviously built by people who kind of ideally want you to clean your inbox out. And yet there's all of this room for us to have, 10,000 unread messages or 10,000 read messages in our inbox. So it's a little opinionated, but it also gives us a lot of room to do things a different way. I want to say, these are the things that I approve. Like this goes with workflow. when I say, yes, I've checked out your code, it seems good, thumbs up, you can go ahead and deploy it, I don't necessarily want to be the one who deploys it. I'm not the one who wrote it. I want to give that back to whoever wrote it. And I want blocking. Blocking is so core to so many things, and we don't really think about it because it seems negative to us. So there's blocking in workflows that's like, thumbs down on your code, go back and fix it, here's where I found a problem. But it's also blocking people. I think it's really interesting that Slack hasn't really implemented a blocking feature because they think of themselves as a workplace thing, and they don't imagine a workplace scenario where you would be harassed by a coworker to the point that you don't want to hear from them anymore. That's a kind of privilege, isn't it? I think blocking is an essential part of being able to use the internet to say, I don't want to hear you right now or ever. You are a person who is hostile to me and I can't deal with you. If we don't have strong blocking, we are saying that the worst elements of the internet are allowed to say whatever they want. They can just come into our living rooms and spew filth at us with no consequences. So blocking is an essential part of an action set that I think we all deserve to have. And finally, personal optimization. When I think about my fancy keyboard or how I have my monitors set up or how I feel about my podcast recording microphones, what I want is the thing that's best for me. My world in the way that it's useful to me. And I want to be able to accept and appreciate your world in a way that I can understand. And the more we understand that communication is both of these things, I think the more we're going to build a web that allows us to translate between different modalities. And that's really exciting for me. I really want the web to be more flexible. I really want us to get out of this constraining idea of like the page and the browser and the app and start to think about what we could do when we combine those elements, what we could do when we combine them with different input and output devices. How is it we could build a better world for everybody's experience? So if this talk was too long and you read Twitter instead, here's what I want you to remember. Build for your unimagined future. It's already around here somewhere. The future is here. It's just unevenly distributed. And although we don't want equity and we want something closer to equality or liberation, we still can work toward making the web more distributed, more powerful, more inclusive, more accessible. That's a thing that seems worth striving for. So, if you enjoyed this talk and want to learn more about LaunchDarkly and how we can help you build a web that has different modes of access and different ways to deliver, please follow this link. Otherwise, you can also get a t-shirt. I'm going to be around for questions for the rest of the day. I love you all RubyConf people, and maybe next year we can all give each other a big hug because I miss you. Thank you.